Wealthy woman marries a taxi driver. Her family's reaction is shocking. The night was alive with the hum of the city. Lights from the towering skyline danced across the black-tinted windows of luxury cars pulling up to the prestigious gala. Inside the grand ballroom, guests clad in designer gowns and tailored suits mingled, their laughter and clinking glasses creating a symphony of wealth and privilege. Victoria Lane stood near the edge of the room, her posture poised but her mind elsewhere. She wore an emerald gown that accentuated her graceful frame, a family heirloom necklace draped across her collarbone. Despite her stunning appearance, she felt out of place. The weight of expectations from her family bore down on her shoulders, and the evening's earlier conversation with her mother lingered in her mind. "Victoria," Eleanor Lane had said, her voice tinged with a mix of disappointment and insistence. "You can't keep avoiding your responsibilities. Jonathan is the perfect match for you. His family is well respected, and together you'd solidify our legacy." "Mother, Jonathan isn't the person you think he is," Victoria had replied, her tone steady but strained. "He doesn't care about me. He cares about the Lane name." "That's enough," her father, Charles, had interjected. "This isn't just about you, Victoria. It's about our family's reputation. You don't have the luxury of defiance." Now, as she stood alone at the gala, she felt trapped. Around her, conversations about mergers and international investments flowed like champagne, but she couldn't bring herself to engage. Her eyes darted to the exit, longing for an escape. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A minor scandal erupted in one corner of the room, a spilled drink on a priceless gown, and the distraction gave Victoria the chance to slip away unnoticed. She grabbed her clutch and headed for the lobby. Outside, the cool night air hit her face, a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere inside. Her family's chauffeur stood at the curb, but the thought of returning home to another lecture from her parents was unbearable. "Mississippi Lane, shall I bring the car around?" the chauffeur asked. Victoria hesitated. Her gaze shifted to the line of taxis parked further down the street. She spotted a cab driver leaning against his vehicle, scrolling through his phone. There was something comforting about his casual stance, a stark contrast to the polished and rehearsed behavior of the gala attendees. "No, thank you," she told the chauffeur. "I'll find my own way." The man looked surprised but nodded, stepping back respectfully. Victoria walked toward the taxis, her heels clicking against the pavement. She approached the driver she'd noticed earlier, a man in his early 30s with an easy smile and kind eyes. His name tag read Jack Carter. "Evening, ma'am," Jack said, straightening up as she approached. "Need a ride?" "Yes, please," Victoria replied, her voice softer than usual. She climbed into the back seat, settling into the worn but clean upholstery. "Where to?" Jack asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Victoria hesitated. She hadn't thought this far ahead. "Just drive for a while. I'll tell you when to stop." Jack raised an eyebrow but didn't question her further. He started the engine, and the cab eased into the flow of traffic. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke, the silence filled only by the muted hum of the city outside. "You don't look like the type who takes cabs often," Jack remarked eventually, his tone light but curious. Victoria smiled faintly. "Is it that obvious?" "A little," he admitted with a chuckle. "What brings you to my humble taxi tonight?" She considered brushing off the question but found herself answering honestly. "I needed to get away. My life feels overwhelming sometimes." Jack nodded knowingly. "I get that. Sometimes, a quiet drive is the best therapy." Victoria glanced out the window, watching the city blur past. "Do you ever feel like you're living a life that doesn't belong to you?" Jack glanced at her through the mirror, his expression thoughtful. "Every day, ma'am. But I figure life's like driving. You don't always get to choose the route, but you can decide how you handle the turns." His words lingered in her mind. There was an honesty in his tone, a lack of pretense that she rarely encountered in her world. For the first time that evening, she felt a sense of calm. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not asking too many questions." Jack grinned. "That's what I'm here for, rides, not interrogations." Over the next few days, Victoria found herself thinking about that cab ride. She couldn't explain it, but something about Jack's simple wisdom had stayed with her. She was used to polished conversations and hidden agendas, but his straightforwardness felt like a breath of fresh air. By the end of the week, she decided to take another ride in his cab. She told herself it was coincidence when she saw him parked near the same spot as before, but deep down, she knew she'd sought him out. Mississippi Lane. Jack greeted her with a smile. "Back so soon?" Victoria smiled back, sliding into the cab. "I guess I like the route you took last time." Jack chuckled. "Well, hop in. Let's see where the road takes us tonight." As the city lights flickered outside, their conversation picked up where it had left off. Victoria found herself sharing more about her life, her family's expectations, the suffocating pressure to conform, and her reluctance to marry Jonathan. "Sounds like you've got a lot on your plate," Jack said, his voice tinged with sympathy. "But you don't strike me as the type to just go along with what others want." "I'm not," Victoria admitted. "But defying my family isn't as simple as it sounds. They have a way of making me feel small." Jack nodded. "Sometimes, the people closest to us don't see us for who we really are. Doesn't mean you stop fighting to be yourself." Victoria fell silent, his words resonating deeply. She realized she felt more understood in those moments with Jack than she ever had in the elaborate mansions and grand halls of her upbringing. Over the next few weeks, those late-night cab rides became a regular escape for Victoria. Jack would often park near the Lane estate, as if he instinctively knew she needed a moment of reprieve from her gilded cage. Each ride took them on a journey through the quieter streets of the city, where the noise of life softened into something manageable. Their conversations grew deeper, stretching beyond small talk into territory that felt raw and vulnerable. Victoria talked about the pressures of being Eleanor and Charles Lane's only daughter, the weight of the legacy she never asked for, and her resentment toward Jonathan's calculated advances. Jack listened without judgment, offering simple but profound insights in return. "Your parents must have high hopes for you," Jack remarked one night, his hands steady on the wheel as they cruised along a quiet boulevard. "They have high hopes for what I can do for their image," Victoria corrected, a trace of bitterness in her voice. "It's always about the family name. Never about what I want." "And what do you want?" Jack asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Victoria hesitated, staring out at the darkened skyline. "I don't know anymore. I used to think I wanted to prove myself, to show them I was more than just their obedient daughter. But now, I just want to feel free." Jack nodded, his gaze returning to the road. "Freedom's a tricky thing. Sometimes, you've got to lose something to find it." His words lingered with her, stirring thoughts she wasn't ready to confront. She'd spent her whole life trying to meet expectations, but for what? Approval that felt hollow? A sense of belonging that never materialized? One evening, as they drove through a part of the city Victoria rarely visited, Jack suddenly pulled over. "What are we doing here?" she asked, her brow furrowing as she looked around. "Thought you might like a change of scenery," Jack said with a grin, stepping out of the cab. He opened her door and gestured toward a modest food truck parked nearby. "Best tacos in town." Victoria laughed, genuinely surprised. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. Come on. You haven't lived until you've tried these." Hesitant but intrigued, she followed him to the food truck. The scent of grilled meat and spices filled the air, and for the first time in years, she felt like an ordinary person, not the Lane heiress, not the socialite, just a woman standing in line for tacos with a man who made her laugh. As they sat on a bench under a flickering street lamp, sharing the simple meal, Victoria felt something shift. Jack's world, though far removed from hers, had a warmth and authenticity she craved. She realized she wasn't just running from her family's expectations, she was running toward something she couldn't yet define. "You're different," she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Jack raised an eyebrow, chewing thoughtfully. "Different how?" "You don't pretend to be something you're not," Victoria said. "Everyone in my world is always playing a part, wearing a mask. But you're real." Jack smiled, a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "I guess when you've got nothing to hide, it's easier to be yourself." Victoria stared at him, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the spicy tacos. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not as the Lane heiress, but as Victoria. Their connection deepened with each passing week, But keeping the relationship a secret became increasingly difficult. Victoria's parents began to notice her frequent absences and growing distance. Eleanor, ever the sharp observer, confronted her one afternoon. "Victoria, you've been distracted lately," Eleanor said, her tone light but probing. "Is there something you're not telling us?" Victoria forced a smile, feigning nonchalance. "I've just been busy with work and other things." "Other things," Eleanor repeated, her eyes narrowing. "This wouldn't have anything to do with why you've been avoiding Jonathan, would it?" Victoria's stomach twisted. She opened her mouth to respond, but Eleanor cut her off. "Jonathan has been very patient, Victoria. He's ready to propose, and your father and I agree it's time you take the next step. This isn't up for debate." The words hit her like a slap. The life her parents envisioned for her felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She left the room without another word, her mind racing with anger and defiance. That evening, Victoria found herself in Jack's cab again, tears threatening to spill as she recounted the confrontation. "They're trying to force me into a life I don't want," she said, her voice trembling. "Marrying Jonathan would be a prison." Jack's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Then don't do it." "It's not that simple," she replied, wiping her eyes. "My parents hold all the cards. If I defy them, I lose everything." Jack pulled over to the side of the road and turned to face her. "Victoria, I know what it's like to feel trapped. But if you give up who you are to make them happy, you'll lose something far more valuable than money or status. You'll lose yourself." His words pierced through her despair, igniting a spark of courage she didn't know she had. She realized then that she had a choice, not an easy one, but a choice nonetheless. "I don't want to lose myself," she whispered. "Then fight for what you want," Jack said, his voice steady. "No one else can do it for you." The cab was filled with a heavy silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Victoria gazed out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and white. Jack started the engine again, merging back into the flow of traffic. Neither of them spoke for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "Jack," she began hesitantly, would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Somewhere that's not your cab or a food truck?" Jack glanced at her, surprise flickering across his features. "Are you asking me out on a date?" he teased gently. She smiled shyly. "I suppose I am." He considered her offer, his expression turning serious. "Victoria, are you sure that's a good idea? Your family—" "My family doesn't control every aspect of my life," she interjected firmly. "At least, I don't want them to anymore." Jack searched her eyes, looking for any hesitation. Seeing none, he nodded slowly. "All right then. I'd like that." The next evening, they met at a small, cozy restaurant tucked away on a quiet street, a place Jack suggested, far from the prying eyes of high society. Victoria arrived early, her nerves fluttering as she adjusted the simple dress she had chosen for the occasion. She wanted to blend into Jack's world, to experience life without the trappings of wealth. Jack entered, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. "You look lovely," he said, taking a seat across from her. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a warmth spread through her at his compliment. They ordered their meals, the conversation flowing easily between them. Jack shared stories of his childhood, growing up in a close-knit community where neighbors looked out for one another. He talked about his younger sister, who was studying to become a teacher, and his mother, who baked the best apple pie in the city. "I'd love to meet them someday," Victoria said sincerely. Jack raised an eyebrow. "You wanting to meet my family? That's a surprise." "Why is that surprising?" she asked, tilting her head. He shrugged. "I just didn't think someone from your world would be interested in mine." Victoria reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. "Jack, I want to know everything about you. Your world feels more real to me than mine ever has." He looked at her hand atop his, a soft smile playing on his lips. "You might regret saying that when my mother starts showing you embarrassing baby photos." She laughed, the sound light and unguarded. "I'll take my chances." As the night wore on, they strolled through the nearby park, the moon casting a silvery glow over the trees. Victoria felt lighter than she had in years, the weight of her family's expectations momentarily forgotten. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly as they paused by a small pond. "I can't remember the last time I felt this happy." Jack turned to face her, his gaze tender. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, Victoria." She met his eyes, a question lingering in the air between them. Before she could second-guess herself, she leaned in and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative, but it ignited a warmth that spread through both of them. When they pulled apart, Jack's cheeks flushed slightly. "I've wanted to do that for a while," he admitted. "Me too," she whispered, her heart pounding. The days that followed were a whirlwind of stolen moments and blossoming affection. Victoria and Jack grew closer, their connection deepening beyond anything either of them had anticipated. But as their relationship flourished, so did the risks. One afternoon, as Victoria returned home from meeting Jack, she found Eleanor waiting for her in the sitting room. Her mother's expression was inscrutable, a delicate teacup cradled in her manicured hands. "Victoria, we need to talk," Eleanor said, her tone betraying nothing. "Of course," Victoria replied cautiously, taking a seat opposite her. "I've noticed you've been spending a great deal of time away from home lately," Eleanor began. "And you've been rather distant. Is there something you'd like to share with me?" Victoria hesitated, debating whether to reveal the truth. But remembering Jack's encouragement to fight for what she wanted, she took a deep breath. "Actually, I've met someone." Eleanor's eyebrow arched slightly. "Oh, and who might that be?" "His name is Jack Carter," Victoria said steadily. "He's a taxi driver?" A flicker of disapproval crossed Eleanor's face. "A taxi driver? Surely you're joking." "I'm not," Victoria insisted. "Jack is kind, intelligent, and he makes me happy." Eleanor set her teacup down with a soft clink. "Victoria, this is unacceptable. You cannot seriously believe that a relationship with this man is appropriate." "Why not?" Victoria challenged. "Because he's not from our social circle? Because he doesn't have a title or wealth?" "Yes, precisely," Eleanor replied sharply. "You have a duty to this family. Associating with someone of his standing is disgraceful." Victoria felt a surge of anger. "Mother, I'm not a pawn to be moved around for the family's benefit. I have the right to choose who I spend my life with." Eleanor's gaze hardened. "You will end this dalliance immediately. Your father and I have tolerated your whims long enough." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Victoria said firmly. "I love him." The declaration hung in the air, the weight of it palpable. Eleanor's eyes widened ever so slightly before narrowing. "Then you leave me no choice?" She stood abruptly, her composure icy. "If you continue down this path, you will force our hand. There will be consequences, Victoria." "What does that mean?" Victoria asked, a knot forming in her stomach. "It means that you will lose everything. Your inheritance, your position in this family, your place in society. Is that what you want?" Victoria swallowed hard, her resolve tested but unbroken. "If that's the price of my happiness, then so be it." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Very well. But don't say I didn't warn you." That evening, Victoria met Jack at their usual spot, her emotions a tumultuous mix of fear and determination. She recounted the confrontation with her mother, her voice wavering only slightly. "They threatened to disown me," she said, gazing out at the sunset. Jack reached for her hand. "I don't want to be the cause of a rift between you and your family." "You're not causing anything," she insisted, turning to face him. "They're the ones making ultimatums." He sighed, concern etched on his features. "Maybe we should take a step back. I can't ask you to give up your entire life for me." "You're not asking me to," Victoria replied gently. "I'm choosing this because I believe in us." Jack searched her eyes, seeing the sincerity and love reflected there. "I don't know how this will work, but I want to try." She smiled softly. "Then we'll figure it out together." Unbeknownst to them, shadows lurked in the corners of their happiness. Jonathan, suspicious of Victoria's behavior, had hired someone to follow her. Photographs of her and Jack together soon found their way into his hands. Jonathan met with Eleanor and Charles, presenting the evidence with feigned concern. "I thought you should know where Victoria has been spending her time," he said smoothly, laying the photos on the table. Eleanor's face paled as she sifted through the images. This is unacceptable. Charles slammed his fist on the desk. She is bringing shame upon this family. Jonathan leaned back, a satisfied smirk barely concealed. Perhaps there's a way to resolve this discreetly. Eleanor looked up sharply. What do you suggest? A meeting, Jonathan proposed. Invite this Jack to the estate. We can make it clear that his involvement with Victoria must end. Charles nodded. Agreed. We'll handle this matter swiftly. A few days later, Victoria received an unexpected invitation from her parents for a family dinner. Hope flickered within her. Perhaps they were willing to accept her relationship with Jack. Maybe they've had a change of heart, she told Jack excitedly. They've invited both of us to dinner. Jack was skeptical. Are you sure this isn't a trap? I want to believe they're willing to give you a chance, she said earnestly. Please, will you come with me? He hesitated but nodded. All right, for you. The grandeur of the Lane estate was on full display that evening. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the opulent dining room, where an elaborate table was set for a small party. Jack felt out of place in his borrowed suit, but Victoria's reassuring smile bolstered his confidence. Eleanor and Charles greeted them with practiced politeness, but their eyes held a steely coldness. As they sat down to dinner, the atmosphere was tense, conversation strained. So, Jack, Charles began, his tone measured. Tell us about your profession. I'm a taxi driver, Jack replied evenly. I also work part-time at a community center. How noble, Eleanor remarked with a hint of sarcasm. And do you believe you can provide for our daughter? Mother, Victoria interjected, glaring at her. Jack met Eleanor's gaze steadily. I may not have much, but I care deeply for Victoria. I want to support her in any way I can. Support her? Charles scoffed. You can't possibly think you can offer her the life she deserves. I'm not trying to compete with your wealth, Jack said calmly. I just want to make her happy. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. And what if we were to offer you compensation to end this relationship? Jack stiffened. Excuse me? Name your price, Charles added bluntly. Everyone has one. Victoria's face flushed with anger. I can't believe you're doing this. Jack stood up, his expression a mix of hurt and indignation. I think it's time for me to leave. Jack, wait. Victoria pleaded, rising to follow him. He paused, looking at her with pained eyes. I won't be bought, but I also won't stand here and be insulted. Perhaps you should consider what's best for Victoria, Eleanor said coolly. A life with you will only bring her hardship. Jack clenched his fists but kept his composure. The only hardship she's facing is coming from you. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Victoria torn between following him and confronting her parents. How could you? She demanded, tears welling in her eyes. We're protecting you, Charles insisted. By driving away the person I love? You're not protecting me, you're controlling me. Eleanor sighed. You'll thank us one day. No, Victoria said firmly. I won't. She rushed after Jack, finding him outside near the garden. Jack, please don't go. He looked at her sadly. Maybe your parents are right. Maybe I'm not good enough for you. Don't say that, she implored. They don't get to decide what's right for us. He shook his head. I don't want to be the reason you lose your family. You're not, she insisted. They're making that choice. I choose you. He hesitated, the conflict evident in his eyes. This is all so much bigger than me, Victoria. I don't know if I can handle it. She took his hands in hers. We can handle it together. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. All right, but we need to be prepared for whatever comes next. She smiled through her tears. As long as we're together. The weeks following the disastrous dinner at the Lane estate were challenging. Victoria and Jack tried to navigate their relationship while bracing themselves for the inevitable fallout from her family. True to their threats, Eleanor and Charles began cutting Victoria off from the family's resources. Her credit cards were canceled, her access to the family's accounts restricted, and her position at her father's charitable foundation quietly dissolved. Victoria faced these changes with a resilience that surprised even her. She moved out of the estate and rented a modest apartment in the city, using her personal savings to get by. Jack supported her as much as he could, though he worried about the strain it was putting on her. "You don't have to prove anything to me, you know," he said one evening as they sat on the couch in her small living room. "I'm not doing this to prove anything," Victoria replied. "I'm doing this because I finally feel free." Jack smiled at her, pride and admiration shining in his eyes. "You're amazing, you know that?" She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm just figuring things out one step at a time." Meanwhile, Eleanor and Charles worked behind the scenes to undermine Jack's life. They pressured his landlord to raise his rent, forcing him to consider moving out of his small apartment. They spread rumors about him among their social circle, painting him as a manipulative gold digger. And then there was Jonathan, who took it upon himself to escalate matters further. Jonathan hired private investigators to dig into Jack's background, looking for anything that could discredit him. When they turned up nothing significant, Jonathan resorted to more underhanded tactics. One day, Jack arrived at the community center where he worked to find the doors locked and a sign posted, "Closed until further notice." Jack immediately called the director, who informed him that the center's funding had been pulled by a major donor, one with ties to the Lane family. "They can't keep doing this," Jack said angrily as he relayed the news to Victoria that evening. "They're trying to ruin my life just to get me out of yours." Victoria's jaw tightened, her determination hardening. "Then it's time we stopped playing by their rules." Victoria decided to confront her parents one last time. She arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a small cafe downtown, to ensure they couldn't manipulate the situation. Eleanor and Charles arrived, their expressions cold and guarded. "What is it you want, Victoria?" Eleanor asked as they sat across from her. "I want you to stop interfering in my life," Victoria said firmly. "This has gone far enough. Jack and I are together, and no amount of manipulation or sabotage is going to change that." Charles scoffed. "You're being naive. Do you really think this relationship will last? You're throwing away everything for a fleeting infatuation." "It's not infatuation," Victoria replied. "It's love. And I'd rather have love and struggle than live a life of wealth and emptiness." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Do you even hear yourself? Love doesn't pay the bills, Victoria. It doesn't secure your future." "No, but it gives my life meaning," she said, her voice unwavering. "Something your money never could." Charles leaned forward, his expression dark. "If you walk away from this family, you'll have nothing. No inheritance, no safety net. Think very carefully about your next move." "I've already thought about it," Victoria said. "And I'm choosing Jack. You can keep your money and your power. I don't need them." Eleanor's lips thinned into a harsh line. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," Victoria said. "But at least it'll be my decision." She stood and walked out, leaving her parents behind in stunned silence. In the weeks that followed, Victoria and Jack began rebuilding their lives together. She took on freelance consulting work, leveraging her education and skills to support herself while contributing to local charities. Jack found another part-time job at a nearby auto shop, supplementing his taxi income. They faced challenges, but their bond grew stronger with each obstacle. One day, as they walked through the park, Jack turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking about starting my own business," he said. "A small taxi company, something I can build for the future." Victoria's face lit up. "Jack, that's an amazing idea. What's stopping you?" He shrugged. "Money, mostly. Starting a business isn't cheap." "What if we work on it together?" she suggested. "I can help with the business plan, maybe find some investors. We can make this happen." Jack smiled, her enthusiasm infectious. "You really believe in me, don't you?" "Always," she said, taking his hand. "You've believed in me when no one else did. It's time I do the same for you." Unbeknownst to them, Jonathan was plotting his next move. Furious that Victoria had chosen Jack over him, he sought to destroy their budding business before it even began. He spread rumors among potential investors, warning them that the venture was doomed to fail. He even went as far as to bribe local regulators to delay the approval of Jack's permits. When Jack learned of Jonathan's interference, he felt defeated. "It's like every time we take a step forward, they push us back," he said, his frustration evident. Victoria placed a hand on his arm. Then we'll push harder. They can't stop us if we refuse to give up. Jack looked at her, her determination reigniting his own. You're right. We've come this far. We're not giving up now. Their breakthrough came when one of Victoria's old friends, someone she thought had sided with her parents, reached out with an offer of support. The friend had connections in the local business community and helped them secure a small loan to get started. With renewed hope, Jack and Victoria launched their taxi company, starting with just 2 cars and a lot of grit. The business quickly gained traction, thanks in part to Jack's reputation for honesty and excellent service. Their story of resilience and love resonated with people, attracting loyal customers and positive press. Slowly but surely, they built something they could be proud of. As the months passed, Jack and Victoria's taxi company began to thrive. Their fleet grew from 2 cars to 5, and they established a reputation for reliability and community-focused service. Word spread quickly, and even those skeptical of their venture couldn't ignore its success. Victoria threw herself into the business, using her skills to handle marketing and operations. She created a campaign highlighting their story, 2 people from different worlds building something meaningful together. It resonated deeply, not just with customers but with local media, who picked up the story and helped boost their profile. Jack, meanwhile, managed the day-to-day operations with a hands-on approach. He trained drivers personally, ensuring that the company's values of honesty and respect were reflected in every interaction. Customers appreciated the warmth and authenticity, and repeat business became the backbone of their growth. Despite their progress, the challenges weren't over. Eleanor and Charles, still determined to assert control, filed a frivolous lawsuit against the taxi company, claiming it was tarnishing the Lane family's reputation. The lawsuit added financial strain as legal fees piled up, but Jack and Victoria refused to back down. "We'll fight this," Victoria said one evening as they reviewed paperwork in their small office. "They're trying to scare us, but we won't let them win." Jack nodded, though the stress was evident on his face. "They're relentless. But we've come too far to give up now." Their lawyer, a sharp but compassionate woman named Rachel, assured them they had a strong case. "This is clearly an intimidation tactic," she said during a meeting. "I'll make sure it gets dismissed, but it might take time." In the meantime, Victoria and Jack doubled down on their efforts, focusing on what they could control. They expanded their community outreach, offering free rides to senior citizens and sponsoring local events. Their goodwill earned them even more support, and the lawsuit only seemed to galvanize their growing base of loyal customers. The turning point came when a prominent journalist published an exposé on the Lane family's tactics. The article detailed their attempts to sabotage Jack and Victoria, painting Eleanor and Charles in a harsh light. Public opinion quickly turned against the Lanes, and the pressure forced them to drop the lawsuit. Victoria confronted her parents shortly after the case was dismissed. She met them at their estate, standing tall despite the familiar weight of their disapproval. "This has to stop," she said firmly. "You've tried everything to tear us down, and it hasn't worked. All you've done is hurt your own reputation." Eleanor scoffed. "You've made a spectacle of this family, Victoria. Do you expect us to applaud you for it?" "I expect you to respect my choices," Victoria replied. "You don't have to approve of Jack, but you will stop interfering in our lives. This is my final warning." Charles, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "You've made your point. You've proven you can survive without us. But don't expect us to embrace this arrangement." "I'm not asking for your approval anymore," Victoria said. "I'm asking for your decency." With that, she turned and walked away, feeling a sense of closure she hadn't anticipated. For the first time, she truly felt free. The following months were a period of growth and healing. Jack and Victoria's business continued to thrive, expanding into new neighborhoods and attracting more drivers who shared their vision. They reinvested their earnings into the community, sponsoring after-school programs and providing free transportation for job seekers. One evening, as they celebrated their one-year anniversary at the small restaurant where they had shared their first real date, Jack surprised Victoria with a small, velvet box. "I know we've been through a lot," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I know life won't always be easy. But I also know there's no one else I'd rather face it with." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "Victoria Lane, will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "A thousand times, yes." The restaurant erupted into applause as Jack slipped the ring onto her finger. For the first time in years, Victoria felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair held at a local park surrounded by friends, community members, and a few estranged Lane family members who had come around to support Victoria. Even Eleanor and Charles attended, though their presence was reserved and cautious. Seeing the genuine love between Jack and Victoria, however, seemed to soften their hardened exteriors. As they exchanged vows, Victoria looked into Jack's eyes, her voice unwavering. "You've shown me what it means to be free, to live authentically, and to love without fear. I promise to stand by you, no matter what challenges come our way." Jack smiled, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "And you've taught me that dreams aren't just about what you achieve, but who you share them with. I promise to love you, support you, and build a life with you, one step at a time." The years that followed were filled with joy and challenges, but Jack and Victoria faced them together. Their taxi company became a cornerstone of the community, and their love story inspired countless others to follow their hearts, no matter the odds. In the end, they didn't just defy expectations. They redefined what it meant to succeed, proving that love and resilience were stronger than any obstacle. As the years went by, Jack and Victoria built a life that was far richer than either had imagined, not in wealth, but in purpose, community, and love. Their taxi company, now a thriving business with a fleet of vehicles and a dedicated team, became known not just for its services but for the values it upheld. Every driver, every ride carried the ethos Jack and Victoria had championed from the start: respect, honesty, and care. Their story inspired people across the city. Customers shared tales of how the couple's company had gone above and beyond, providing free rides during emergencies, helping students get to job interviews, and even delivering groceries to those in need during hard times. Jack and Victoria had made their business a cornerstone of the community, and the community loved them for it. One afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through the bustling streets they had once driven, Jack paused outside a small, vacant storefront. A for lease sign hung in the window, and he turned to Victoria with a thoughtful look. "What are you thinking?" she asked, a playful smile tugging at her lips. Jack grinned. "I was thinking it's time we expand. What if we opened a customer service hub here? A place where people can walk in, book rides, and connect with our drivers face to face." Victoria's eyes sparkled. "I love it. It could be more than just a booking center. It could be a space for workshops, job fairs, and even community events." Jack squeezed her hand. "That's why I need you. You always take my ideas and make them better." Victoria laughed. "Teamwork, remember?" Their personal lives flourished alongside their business. Jack's mother became a regular visitor to their home, bringing apple pies and stories that never failed to make Victoria laugh. Victoria, in turn, forged a bond with Jack's younger sister, mentoring her as she finished her studies and pursued a teaching career. Even the icy relationship with Eleanor and Charles began to thaw. At first, their visits were rare and tinged with tension, but over time, as they saw the life Victoria and Jack had built together, their disapproval softened. Eleanor, once so rigid in her expectations, surprised everyone when she attended a community fundraiser hosted by Jack and Victoria. She even contributed a generous donation, though she insisted it was for the cause and not a gesture of approval. For Victoria, the real victory came in small, quiet moments, like when her father, Charles, stopped by their home unannounced one evening. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset, and for the first time, he asked her about her life without judgment. "You've built something good here, Victoria," he said gruffly. "I didn't think you could, but you've proved me wrong." Victoria smiled, the words meaning more than she expected. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot." On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jack and Victoria hosted a celebration at the community center they had helped rebuild. Friends, family, employees, and customers gathered to honor their journey. There was laughter, music, and heartfelt speeches, but the highlight of the evening was when Jack took the microphone. "I've been called a lot of things in my life. A taxi driver, a dreamer, even an underdog, he began, his voice steady and warm. But the title I'm most proud of is husband. Victoria, you've taught me that love isn't about where you come from or what you have. It's about who you are and the life you build together. Thank you for believing in me and for giving me a life I never dreamed possible. Tears glistened in Victoria's eyes as she took the microphone from him. Jack, you've shown me that freedom isn't about breaking away. It's about finding the place where you truly belong. With you, I've found that place. Thank you for standing by me and for teaching me what love really means. The crowd erupted into applause as Jack pulled her into an embrace, their love shining brighter than ever. Years later, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their 2 children play in the yard, Jack turned to Victoria with a contented smile. Do you ever think about how far we've come? He asked. All the time, she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. And I wouldn't change a thing. Their life wasn't without challenges, but together, they had proven that love, perseverance, and a little courage could overcome even the tallest of obstacles. Their story wasn't just one of defying odds. It was a testament to the power of believing in each other and the strength of building a life rooted in authenticity and love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over their home, Victoria whispered, "We may have started on different paths, but we found the perfect route together." Jack smiled, his heart full. "And I wouldn't have it any other way."